Our top story, which comes from the port of Los Angeles, where President Joe Biden gave a speech attacking ocean carriers about rates that have gone up 1,000%. John Gallagher from Washington, D.C. joins us now.
John, thank you for joining us this morning. Let's dig into a little bit about President Biden's remarks. Just kind of give us the overview right away.
Yeah, so on Friday, he basically laid a lot of blame at the feet of 9 ocean carriers that dominate the Trans-Pacific trade. He basically, on the speech at the Port of Los Angeles on Friday, he sort of repeated assertions that he had made in a video that the White House released the night before while he was at the White House. It showed him at the White House talking to some shippers that were complaining about the prices they were paying. Like one of them talked about $3,500 per container fee that they had been paying in 2020. Last year that went up to it was like $20,000 to $25,000 per container. So that's 1,000% increase. Another was talking about $100 million in transportation costs that they incurred was basically transportation costs was basically more than their entire profit for the year last year. So I mean, and Biden was talking about how this was outrageous and everything. It is outrageous. I mean, it's a pretty outrageous increase. And in the video and in his speech, he talked about the big reason for consumer prices going up. They had that big report on Friday about how inflation jacked up to 8.6%. Well, Biden used the speech to basically lay a lot of blame, for the cost of moving goods from Asia to the West Coast. But the thing is that there were a couple of things that sort of go against that narrative. One is, the FMC just came out a couple of weeks ago saying, with a conclusion to a report, saying there's no evidence of collusion among the carriers. And another was this idea that there are just the 9. He kept repeating these 9 companies, but it's not exactly true of the companies that are moving freight in that cargo containers in that trade. We're assuming he's talking about 9 companies that are in these 3 major ocean alliances, but he didn't mention that there's actually a consultant put out after that speech, or I think after the video, maybe he put up on his LinkedIn. He talked about there are these 13 carriers, smaller carriers that have, because of so much supply and demand over the last year in that trade, 13 carriers, smaller carriers came in and were also moving cargo, and it was basically so that the numbers that he had was. These 13 additional carriers that went into that trade, they made 241 sailings from Asia to the West Coast from January 1st of this year to now, basically. And that's 31% of the sailings moving cargo from Asia to the West Coast. Now, again, granted, those are smaller carriers, but it's still, that's still a chunk of capacity that's not, again, goes against that narrative about just these 9 companies. And So Biden also used his speech and the video to sort of tee up the Ocean Shipping Reform Act bill, which Congress will likely actually it looks like they might be taking that up today, actually. And if they do and they vote on it, the indications are it's going to pass. So then the question becomes, what will that do to bring down prices? I mean, that's the question there too.
John, obviously we know that a lot of this focus was on the astronomical kind of fee increase while these ocean carriers are still raking in record profits, as Biden said. But was any of that attention or even the blame focused on detention and demurrage charges that carriers are charging as well? Or was there any kind of conversation about detention and demurrage too?
No, there wasn't, Kaylee, and that's the thing, and that's a large part of what the Ocean Shipping Reform Act bill does. It sort of targets that a lot. So that's a good point, because that's another little bit of a disconnect there. He kept talking about the inflation and the prices, but a lot of what this bill does is it was geared initially actually for U.S. exporters, It has a bunch of things in there that can be done to sort of bring more transparency to the whole situation in terms of rates and services. But a couple of the main provisions in it are, like you said, it's about demurrage and detention, which has taken a lot of the focus at the FMC. So that good to your question, that you can see that sort of as another disconnect, because he didn't really talk about the detention to demurrage that's been going on during this whole time.
The administration's focus on this now, in your perspective, is this the right focus to really kind of be honing in on, or are there other areas that we really can buff up and really kind of make a little bit better for these inflationary pressures? One I'm thinking about, of course, is we're still having tariffs overseas and imports coming from China. Is there anything in your mind that we can really kind of be focusing on a little bit more, or is this kind of the right perspective now?
Yeah, I mean, it is. The tariff is one thing. I mean, it's really, if you talk to the World Shipping Council, they would say, it's a supply and demand. It's a supply and demand situation. So, how much this is going to do to help the situation again is a question. And you're right, Anthony. There are other things that you can bring up to. I mean, it's energy prices are. He did talk about energy prices too, and he talked about Putin's energy war. I forgot the way he said it. Putin's inflation war, whatever he said. So he talked about that. He talked about grain. The fact that with the Ukraine situation, you had the grain. Supply and demand for grain was down, so that's going to have to be that he's going to have to do more there to help with that, with moving that commodity, which is also causing prices to go up. So there are other areas. Again, how much the Ocean Shipping Reform Act addresses the situation, it's sort of unknown. And the other thing about this reform bill, it's not the House bill was way more prescriptive in how it addressed demurrage and detention, and how it addressed how the container carriers operate their business in terms of the containers that they have available for imports, the containers that they have available for exports. The House bill would have been much more strict in mandating how they operate that way. Now, the Senate bill, it sort of leaves that open through rulemakings, and the World Shipping Council sees that's actually a positive thing, because that allows them to at least weigh in through a rulemaking on what happens with any rule that goes through in the Senate bill. So it's kind of telling that they're sort of okay with the Senate bill. And again, so we'll see what happens with that.
So John, let's finish this up by talking a little bit about the Ocean Shipping Reform Act and if it gives, or how it gives, any more power back to the FMC to not only now review rates, but also alter them if they see fit. Is that something that we could be moving back towards?
Yeah, a little bit. Like I said, it gives. It's not as prescriptive as the House bill, because it opens up these rulemakings, requirements for rulemakings versus mandating actual operations. So it does till it will. The other point of it is to give leverage back to the 98 bill. Sort of opened things up more for our. It was more of a. What's the word I'm looking for? It basically allowed for more open market competition, and this one sort of, which over the last 20 years, the carriers have the industry has consolidated, so that gave the carriers kind of more leverage. So this would kind of turn that back, like you said, a little bit in favor of the shippers, at least give them a little bit more leverage. But again, it's, we'll have to see what happens there. And of course, the other thing is that the FMC, even beyond what the Ocean Shipping Reform Act does, the FMC has been getting more. They've put in place more penalties. We just reported last week, Hapag-Lloyd was hit with it was a $2 million settlement that they did. But I mean, you could say it's a drop in the bucket for a big company like that, but it is a signal, and it does, and it would act as a deterrent. It could act as a deterrent in terms of how the carriers operate and how they put their service out there.
And John, before we let you go, what other stories are you going to be looking at throughout this week?
Let's see. Well, one actually today there's an interesting webinar talking about Russia sanctions and how they're affecting logistics business. So that should be interesting to see. And I'm going to be this Ocean Shipping Reform Act bill I believe is coming up today. So those are the two things that are kind of immediately on my plate.
Hi, John. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. Great to have you as always. I'm sure we'll be watching this as it continues to move through. And you know what? We'll probably get some historical perspective from Sal Mercogliano about this eventually this week as well.
Exactly right. I'm looking forward to it because this is going to be an interesting one that plays out and develops as it continues to move on. Right now, we're going to go over to the wall because we have our first carrier update of the morning.